holds up to where it's about a 3% or better increase, I think we may not see as much of a concern that we've been having on here. So we're hoping that concern goes away. Also with federal ESSER dollars, we've had that as a concern as well, as far as sustainability of that funding. We actually addressed that in the FY25 budget proposal. Some of those more critical needs, like tutoring, academy coaches, college and career leading positions, student assessment software, we actually went in and did some budgetary reallocations and embedded those from what I would call initiatives funding through ESSER, budgeted those in the existing FY25 proposal. The one item that has appeared on here, and we've kind of been keeping our eyes on this, are future debt obligations, and Chris is going to talk a little bit more in detail about this later. But as we're looking at how these bonds are rolling on in the future, there will be significant increases coming on. We keep in mind over the last couple of years we've built 3 additional schools. Mill Creek, that would be Gibbs, Middle, and most recent it would be Lonsdale and Adrian Burnett at Mill Creek. 2 of those, of course, were replacement schools, one address growth. And then Farragut Elementary solution on our upcoming capital plan to address growth. Also, it appears that the Western Heights community looks to be growing. They have to address that in the future as well. So if you have these schools rolling on, obviously you have to find a way to pay for those. So I think Chris is going to talk a little bit more about that. But I suspect that in the future we will keep that as an area of concern, because we want this committee especially to be aware that this is something that we're going to have to grapple with in future budgets.
Any questions for Commissioner Schoonmaker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Under the TISA funding, is it my understanding that the state has only guaranteed the TISA funding through FY25?
Haven't heard that one. You mean it would be some sort of a rollback?
No, that they would have to come back again, the legislature, and approve it for the next cycle.
I have not heard that. I'm not saying that's not true. We would have to revisit that. I would hope that if that is the case, there would not be significant changes in the wrong direction, simply because we would have school districts all over the country, probably all over the state, that are using these dollars in recurring initiatives that we feel are the most strategic way to help students. So I will definitely check on that.
Okay. Yeah. If you don't mind, I'd like just a clarification.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Will do.
Commissioner Hill?
Thank you. This may, Ron, this may tie with what Commissioner Schoonmaker was asking. I too was thinking that there was supposed to be something built in that under this new formula, counties that got less money, that the counties that had their commissions kicking in and helping with the different piece of it were supposed to be held harmless for like 3 years, and that was going away. Help me with that.
Right. So I think that probably would be more challenging for those districts where maybe their local legislative body is funding the local minimum requirement that TISA calls for. This body is going above and beyond that. So that really hasn't been a concern for us because this body funds not only the minimum requirement, but they fund beyond that as well, and that goes back largely because of sales tax. The sales tax has been so good over the years. It's actually going up, and I don't see that being a a really challenging issue for this body.
Thank you.
Commissioner Frazier?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question with the state entertaining the idea of teacher salaries. Where is that funding going to come from?
Well, we have implemented, or we propose to implement, historic salary increases for the upcoming year, and that gets our minimum pay for teachers starting out at a bachelor of about $47,000. That gets us to about $50,000 for a master. So it would be our intent to meet that requirement not next year, right? When we can, and so what we would do is we would build that component in to take care of that. I can tell you so. This year, we were under the commitment that for significant salary increases, which comes on the heels of a third-party vendor that we engaged, Evergreen Solutions, to look at all salaries in Johnson County schools in an attempt to bring those salaries up to market ranges. And so we are adopting those recommendations. We have actually made some pretty good strides over the years, over the last, I would say, 5 years, to bring those teacher salaries up to the more competitive levels. And I think this puts us in position, poised to actually get there maybe a little quicker than before. But we actually found it in our own budget. We went in and made some difficult choices and some budgetary realignments where we went in and the superintendent charged all the departments initially that he wanted every department to go through every line item. Does it align with their 4 core priorities? And I can tell you, even in just our division, there were some things in there that were very useful to us. There were some analytical tools and software. Did it align with the 4 core priorities? Not as well as we hoped. Plus, we could have gathered that. We have other alternative ways to gather that information, maybe not as quickly or efficiently, but that's an area that we could probably do without, and we could do some workarounds to get that same information. And other departments went through the same exercise. So we took a really hard, critical look, essentially from the ground up. Budgets typically are, this is where we were this year, right? This is what we want to add on, and this is our new proposal. Didn't really work that way this year. We had to go back to the drawing board and justify every line item. It was a really healthy exercise, right? And I think that's kind of the new model that we're operating in, that we're committed to find those dollars within our own budget.
How does that impact the number of teachers, teacher assistants, assistant principals, and also did it impact the teacher-student ratio?
Not significantly impacted the student-teacher ratio, but what we did do, and we did form about a year ago a staffing committee, and that's comprised of principals, that is comprised of regional directors, folks from HR, folks from finance, and we were all working together to see our staffing models where they need to be. And what resulted is when there are fluctuations in enrollment, we're going to move those resources where those kids are. And in the past, over the last couple of years, we've kind of held schools harmless simply because COVID created so many challenges, right? We didn't want to be overly disruptive. So for the upcoming year, we have just simply said, okay, that one school maybe gains 3 teachers. Well, rather than being 3 teachers that we have in the budget, we're going to look around and say, well, where are some schools that are actually losing positions because their enrollments have decreased? And so HR is working with that process to move folks around to essentially follow the students. So it is a more efficient and effective process there. And it's quite honestly, it helped our budget.
Commissioner Daly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ron, I hear that we're in Delaware County. Chris may be answer this for you one. How much are we considered in Delaware County? Do we send $500 million and only get back $300 million?
That's a great question. We actually took a look at that probably 4 or 5 years ago, and I wouldn't want to be quoted with this. I see Jesse over here timing. So, this is a soft number, okay, but I think we looked at this before, and Chris, you may want to go here. That at the time, several years ago, it looked like maybe around $70 million had maybe redirected it to other districts. I think, Chris, maybe that was around. I really need to go back and firm that number up. And the reason that happens is there is this component that we've talked about before called fiscal capacity. And so when the state, they have these pool of dollars, they run it through the formula, and then they will look at, let's say for Knox County, they will say, okay, Knox County has the fiscal capacity to fund a larger portion of their educational cost requirements than a poor rural county. And so then they will adjust that. And so you can see, we can see, okay, we earn, that's how there's a distinction between basically what's on the formula versus what you really earn. And so there's some other dynamics at play there in the sense that the state will, and this is previously under BEP, it's a more student-centered approach now, but under BEP, they would look at the number of ADMs and they would say, okay, you have X number of first graders. And so for every 20 first graders, you earn a teacher. Well, we know that there's not either 20, 40, or 60, or 80 first graders at every school. And so what you might have is you might have 25 first graders or 26 first graders at the school, which means BEP requires you to hire one more position. So the requirement is at the classroom or grade band level. The funding is not, however. The funding is based on these nice little incremental pieces of 20. And so what we found is that so we may have one teacher that is quote funded by the state, but based on fiscal capacity, it's only partially funded by the state. You bring in the second teacher, and none of it is funded by the state. So we have a portion of our teaching force partially funded with state dollars. And so you run into issues like that, or economies of scale, so to speak. So, and to complicate matters there, we don't find out exactly where we're going from the state until July when everything's been approved. So.
Any additional questions for Mr. McPherson? Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Next item is here from our trustee. If you would join us at the podium and state your name and county of residence, please.
Justin Biggs, 400 West Main Street, Knoxville, Tennessee. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you guys today. If I could just take a second, Chairman Jay, I'd like to highlight we are losing our high school intern, Katie Dia. She's the valedictorian for Central High School, and we have just found out that her GPA has went up. She's got a 4 out of UT, and she's got a 4.66 GPA, and I'm very, very proud of her. So if we could give Ms. Katie I'll hear about that. Thank you for your time. So I'll just hop right into it real quick. One of the things that we've been talking about for quite some time now here before everyone is the tax sale and the money it generates and things of that nature. I've placed before you a tax sale 24 list. Commissioner Jay and Vice Chair Schoonmaker, I'm going to be sending them a by district tax sale list. If everybody wants, I'll just go ahead and send it to everyone all at once if that's okay with everybody. So we're receiving a really good rate, very favorable rate. It's not changed. It's the 5.65 through First Bank. We've been doing really good with them. I'm very pleased with them. They came. We've had a lot of meetings. We do have to look at that contract is a renewal in 26. So Director Caldwell and myself have really been trying to keep a good relationship with them. We're very lucky. We've got some great people over there, some great team members over there. One of my mentors is over there, and he and I talk a lot about everything that goes on with them, and they're very pleased with us in Knox County. If I'm not mistaken, we're not we're one of the largest funds that they have. So going through that, we're looking at the interest that we've earned through First Bank ICS sweeps, ICS savings, LGIP and stuff like that. You'll see that number located on the sheet. Then we're going to roll into Raymond James, the interest that we've earned from investments through them through 2023 of May until this month is, or until March is $708,369. We did purchase some treasury bills from Raymond James, earning 5.33. Not really, if everybody here remembers about this time last year, we kept hearing hard landing and how the market was going to tank, and then it went from a hard landing to a soft landing. And if you come to the investment committee, you'll kind of hear from Stephen Rosen, who talks about the direction that he feels like the market's going to head and what we're up for. So we're trying to branch out and do a couple things. So if it does head in that direction, that we're still safe. But at the exact same time, given the overnight money that we're accruing right now, we're not trying to get that up too quickly. Tax sale 24 is going to be held at the Grand Event Center, June 26, 2024, for the commissioners who came to the tax sale last year. You realize that we were at capacity. We've outgrown the large assembly room here, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. That's a great thing. We do our in-person tax sales. We do not do those online. We've looked at maybe doing a hybrid, but given the amount of money that we're doing in person, we feel like that it's best that we keep having in-person tax sales and give people an opportunity to come down. We have already started the process for tax sale 25, which will be held next year. We put 250 parcels out for title. We have about 850 more. We're going to try to run around 1,100. Tax sale 24 was 1,375 parcels, so it was bigger, but we've had a large amount of people pay out. We're down to about 250 or so parcels left in that sale for June the 26th. I attached our tax freeze, tax relief report. I won't go over that real quick. One of the things that I do want to remind everyone is this body voted on an increase for tax freeze, and when we voted on that, it does not start until next year. So you won't see that huge increase until next year. And that limit will be $60,000. It was 42, but it's gone up to $60,000 this upcoming year. So what is tax relief and tax freeze? Tax relief is basically it's a program that's given by the state that says for people that make under a specific dollar amount that they cannot, they can sign up on this program and they're going to get back $120. So the state regulates that number. Right before we come down here, we actually found out that number has actually increased. That number now is going to be $36,370. That's a $2,910 increase. So we're hoping that we can obtain more people on that. And increasing from $42,440 to $60,000. We're preparing for a rather large increase across the whole county and also the city as well. And then you have the disabled veterans component of it, which has had a huge increase throughout the county, and we've seen a lot of benefit from that as well. We've been very busy trying to get it out. You've probably seen us at a bunch of different events, seen us talking about working with Buzz Wells and Pat and all the others across the county, trying to help spread the word out. Running into a little bit of issue because disabled veteran component, you do run into HIPAA. You can't just go up and ask people what's your disability and stuff like that. So it's a little bit more difficult, but we're still doing the best that we possibly can. I will move on to unfavorables.
Can you, hold on just a second. Do you know how this equates financially, this report, with I think we talked about that a few, how do we translate that to dollars? And you probably don't have it right now, but I think in the future, it's just helpful for us to understand kind of the but for.
Unfortunately, it's not as popular as I want it to be. It's not as significant as residents don't really know about it, so dollar-wise, it's not as a huge impact as you would probably think that it was. I can get that data from the property assessor's office. They're the ones that help us mine that data up there, and I can get that from
Thank you.
the assessor Whitehead. But it's not as significant as you would think that it would be. moving back to unfavorables. They are two companies that have filed bankruptcy. Express, I believe everybody knows about that. And then Joann's. Joann's it's a fabric company. Joann's Fabric, if everyone knows what that is. So that means to us that a lot of things are going from brick and mortar to more of a click and order style. You know, your Amazons and stuff like that. So we're kind of seeing if we can go on that. We're watching the market for our trends to watch to make sure that we can get the best possible rate. We've been saying that for some time, but it does look like the Fed is going to wait till later this year to drop. When we were in investment meeting, they were talking about it probably be around this time, and now it keeps getting pushed out further and further. So we're looking at the end of the year. To do that, you really do have to take the presidential election into account. That really affects the Fed rate and kind of some of the things that we do. So anybody have any questions?
Commissioner Daly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Harrison.
I'm good, thank you.
Again, this tax sale's a lot of city. Have you worked on trying to recruit? Who's going to be talking about that? Have you talked to?
Not having any luck. The reason I was hoping to maybe come to some sort of agreement on housing the tax sales, you know, stuff like that. But no, sir. Unfortunately, I'm not really having luck.
Commissioner Schumer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On your last page of your report, the 2014 through 2024 property tax levies, of the 8.6 million that's outstanding by, say, July 1, what do you think that number will come down to?
I would say about 6.4. I would say about 6.4. We should, I'm not gonna say easily, but we should do around 2.2 million on June 26th. That should be where we should be at.
Okay, thank you.
Now, that could go either way. And the reason being is because the parcels that aren't sold in the tax sale, Knox County does consume those parcels. That's how the surplus sale is done. Any parcel that's not purchased by, let's say Commissioner Beeler wants to purchase a property, or anyone wants to come and purchase a property. If that person does not do that, then Knox County assumes that property, and after the redemption period's up, which, just for reference, so everybody knows this, the legislature passed a law that we are following. If you're 2 to 5 years delinquent, it's a 1-year redemption period, so that means you cannot do anything to that property for 1 year. 5 to 8 years delinquent, it's basically a 6-month period. And then 8 years and more, it's only 90 days. So the major reason that a lot of people would not come and purchase these properties is they would say, well, I don't want to have my money tied up for a year. Well, now that's not really an issue. We started exercising that. As Chancellor Mr. Morris will tell you, we started exercising that last year, tax sale 23 right here. And people, it went over like gangbusters. And so if Knox County does consume those properties, you'll see them turned over to Matt and Ben. And that's how you have the surplus sale. That's why the dates are so much different on the surplus sale. And usually they set the number back and they do pretty well, but that's why I can't say for sure 2.2 million, because I don't know what properties are going to get bid on or whatnot. But there's farms in here, there's homes in here that people have kind of walked away from, and things of that nature. There's some great parcels that's in this, cleaning up a lot of blighted property.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for the report.
Thank you.
Moving on our agenda to Finance Director, if you would join us, and please state your name and county residence for the record, please. Mr. Cullen.
Chris Caldwell in Knox County. Good afternoon. We'll start on page 1 of just says these financial summary, FY '24, July '23 through April of '24. Basically, if you look at all funds, about $4.3 million ahead of where we were this time a year ago. One thing that I would mention on there, that's all funds. And so if you just look at the general fund, revenues outpaced last year's revenues by about 12.8 million, but expenses outpaced last year's expenses by nearly 20.1 million. So that's a decrease of 7.2 million favorable to where we were a year ago. So a year ago, through April, revenues outpaced expenses in the general fund about 15.5 million. That number now is about 8.2. And so, while that's still a really good number that we've discussed in the past, that just means that our available amount that we have for designations does shrink, right? And so we're about half of where we were a year ago. Still favorable, but just wanted to point that out. Looking at sales tax collections through February, about 12.2 million favorable through all three funds. If you look though, the vast majority of that is general purpose school funds. You'll see the general fund and EPW are basically flat, meaning that what leads to this would be that revenue collections and what we would deem to be the county is fairly flat. There's growth in the city, which is leading to that school number being a little higher. But we have saw a flattening. I will say February was better than what we saw the previous couple of months, but still the last 3 to 4 months fairly flat on local office and sales tax collections. Per percentage of current property taxes collected through current being last week was 100.69%. So from a budgetary standpoint, we've already got our budget related to that. That's what that means. So I'm looking at it budget to budget, and so actuals exceed the budget by almost 2/3%, a little over 2/3%. So just some positive trends. Hotel collections are up 6.67% through February. That's down a little bit compared to where we were a couple months ago. We were at above 10%, so that number is settling down a little bit. Current property taxes are up 2.73% over the FY23 number. That's actuals to actuals. Bank and investment earned is up about 4.5 million through March. Those are positive trends. Stable trends, I mentioned sales tax before. Gasoline tax has basically been flat the whole year, July through February. Negative trends, will tax revenue is down about 5.25% through March. And same as Ron, we'll talk about debt service levels, and we'll get to those. Of note, I sent you all an email last week. A couple of weeks ago, Moody's and S&P reaffirmed our bond rating of AA1 and AA plus, and we had our bond sale last week where we sold about $95 million worth of bonds and got a 3.63% interest rate, which is really good. About a week before, the market was trending about 4% on interest rates, so we had 14 investment groups trying to buy those bonds, and we ended up getting a really good rate compared to what things were just a week ago. So that is a note and is positive. I'm going to stop there and answer your questions about just where we stand today on financials.
Commissioner Skillinger?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was looking at a report that's generated by the Tennessee Department of Revenue, and the liquor by the drink tax that was collected by the three entities in Knox County is a little over $12 million. What percentage of that goes to Knox County schools?
looking at Jennifer. She's here with her about time. She'll get that and get that to you.
Is it 50%, do you think? Or it's kind of hard to see her in the shadows shaking her head. Yes, okay. I also have another question for Jennifer. Sure. She can answer that real quickly. I noticed on another report that the state does on non-retail collections, they showed that Knox County this fiscal year collected $144 million, Knox County, the city of Knoxville, and town of Farragut, okay? Collected $144 million in what they classify as amusements. Do you have any idea what that is? They do a non-retail report for communications, wholesale, hospitality, which is obviously the hotels, auto repair, miscellaneous repair, movies, and then it says amusements. If you can check that out, I mean, I just thought that was kind of amazing that that's like $12 million a month just from whatever amusements is.
At the state, she could probably call and ask what,
And I can give
amusements, or I could make some.
I mean, I can't believe, would that be the Knoxville Zoo? Would they have 12 million in revenue from the zoo? I can't imagine.
I don't think it's that.
Could be online gambling.
Not 12 million a month?
Oh, yeah. I bet you it's a.
Well, let them
that's
check it
just a
out, man. I
technical-
thought that was interesting. Yeah. 12 million a month?
Yeah, could be.
For Knox, everybody in Knox County? And we got you down for how much of that 12 million a month?
Commissioner
All
Daly?
right.
Very sorry.
Problem solved. Yes, thank you.
In the back there could be like top golf or things like that, but we'll call the state and ask what they can consider amusements.
Commissioner Daly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chris, why is you think the gasoline taxis are down? Hey, people driving every day. I mean,
Yeah, I think ultimately, it could be as prices go up, then people buy less. I think it just kind of weighs itself out. We had planned on it being fairly flat, and the state had projected that a year ago, and so their projections have came to pass. And so I don't, other than just speculations, all I would be doing.
Other questions for Director Caldwell before we get into debt discussion? All right, roll that wonderful debt footage, Mr. Caldwell.
I know everybody's excited.
I
to
say
talk
that
about
with
debt
all
today.
sarcasm
Yeah.
possible.
So who read all the debt stuff before you? I'm just kidding. I'm not going to ask you that. That's boring you to tears. So I'm going to start, which would be page 2 of your handout. But basically, this is a page that we put in our budget book every year. And it's projected debt service expenditures. And it just talks about our payments. And so on this page, and it's on the screen in front of you if you don't have it in front of you, you have basically 3 sections here. You have Knox County debt, school debt, and then total debt, which are just those 2 added together. So of note of importance here to me is this. If you go down to the budgeted 2024 line, which is about, I guess, about halfway down the page, you will see that county's principal and interest combined for 24, which is current year, which we're about to end, is a little more than 38.1 million. Schools is 31.9 million. Did you all see those numbers? Okay. So those to me are the columns I'm going to pay attention to. So that is budgeted for 24. If you follow each column down through 2029, and why do we only show 2029 on here? It's because this 5-year capital plan only takes us through budgeted debt of 2029. So we don't have an estimate on what we're going to budget for in 2030 or 2031. So that's why we stop with 2029, because we have a 5-year schedule, and we'll estimate what we think interest rates will be and things like that. So look on the county side. You will see that we go from 38.1 million in 24, then you see in 25, 42.9, then all the way down to 2029 where you got 50.9 million in projected debt service payments. Go over to the next, I guess 3 columns away, the school number. You'll see their number is 31.9 million in 24. That number grows to 37.9 in 25. Then in 2029, it jumps to 51 million. So that's principal and interest payments for the schools and for the county. Basically what you got on your page is 24 through 29. So on the county side, that's about a $12.7 million increase over those 5 years, which is about 33.5%. The school number is about 19.1 million more, which is about 59.9%. And so those are drastically higher numbers that we have seen. And you've heard me say time and time again, there are 2 things that we have to pay for before we even look at an operating budget. And what are those 2 things? Debt and pension. No ifs, ands, buts about them. And so to put some levity to the situation, I had a department head that I was talking to about these payments, and in his humor, he said, "Well, tell me what the least amount that I can pay." So, you get a credit card statement and it says total balance and it says amount due, right? He says, "So what's the amount due on our debt?" And I said, "Well, the amount due is what you see. The amount due that's what we've agreed to pay." And so that is the amount due. And so I think the point I'm trying to make here, and Ron put it on his schedule, is debt service payments are increasing, and we'll get to a second why those are increasing. Let me give you a really good example. We just sold bonds for 2024, $95.25 million worth of bonds. We got a 3.63% interest rate, which is really good, right? What is the interest on 20 years for that, for 3.6%, 20 years on 95 million? Almost $47 million. So you got a great interest rate. Ron and I always say this, no matter what your interest rate is on 20-year debt, you can almost bet that if you take about half of what your principal is, you add that back in interest. So think about that. So when we're paying for things with bonds, which we do, right? You can get, let's say we got a 2% interest rate. It wouldn't be like we were saying 2 to 1. It's close. You just save a little bit, right? And so 20-year bonds, even with great interest rates, you pay a lot of interest. And so as an example, that principal amount of $95.25 million, when it's all said and done, we'll pay a little over $142 million in 20 years on those projects. So it's just facts. So this is just looking at debt service, basically 25 through 29. So then, as I put this together, I said, what are questions that I would ask, which are probably kind of scary. But so I try to always think about ways to explain things that make sense, right? That I don't get too financial, so to speak. And so I wanted to show you then we'll show next on this, on the next page is, okay, Chris, you've shown me those expenses are increasing. What is the revenue doing to support those expenses, right? So if you go to the next page, what you see is 24 through 29, projected debt service expenses versus the projected revenue, and then a variance, okay? Red's bad, by the way. Sorry. So what we have here is, and so how did you project revenue for the next 5 years? I know the amount of property tax that us and schools are paying for debt service in 2025, and we project 2% growth every year. So I think that's a reasonable expectation to assume. So in 24, on the county sides first, right? So in 2024, about 963 million in the red compared to expenses. I think we'll actually beat that number a little bit. It won't be quite that bad, but let me start here with a caveat. This number, this variance column is not cumulative. It's year to year, 1. 2, currently we have $20.3 million in debt service fund balance that solely belongs to the county. So we have $20.3 million in fund balance that we can use to pay debt. Because ultimately, what's grew that fund balance is our revenues exceeded our expenses, and so that's what makes that up. So you go to 2025, you see that variance is about 2.5 million. 2026, 4.2 million. 2027, 3.4 million. 2028, 5.6 million. 2029, 7.1 million, right? And so I think you run out of fund balance in 2028, I believe, if I remember correctly. So
Can you say that again? I think it's really important.
yeah,
Because you don't have a total on these columns.
Yeah, I know. So I think that we run out of fund balance in it's in late 2028 or early 2029.
So we've used up the reserve account for all debt service in the next 4 years.
Correct. So keep that in mind. Now let's go to school. We'll go to schools, and I'm not going to step on Ron's toes. So if I start saying anything that Ron doesn't like, he's going to run up here and hit me, which is perfectly fine. It won't be the first time. What I'm doing here on theirs is historically they have done a transfer from general purpose school fund to cover the difference in what their property tax covers in debt service, okay? But we moved 4 more pennies in 25. Assuming this budget gets approved. In 2025, they have almost the same number of pennies as the county has, which equates to about $38 million in debt service payments. So ultimately, keep that in mind. I think it's about 36, not 38. So this variance for them, 3.9, 3.2, 9.8, 9.6, 9.1, that's on top of the revenue. So I think I would say there's like this. We have decreased their transfers into debt service by moving pennies on property tax because we wanted to get that to 0. The auditors wanted that at 0. So we've moved 8 pennies the last 2 years to get that to about $2 to $3 million. That number is going to continue to grow by what's been done in the past and the capital plan that's before you. So I think it's important to know. I think I've said this. I think oftentimes we don't put together a capital plan and how it's paid for, right? We'll say, rightly or wrongly, I'd like to have this project, right? Or this project would be good, or so on and so forth. We never think about how those things get paid for. There's been many times that I will call Ron, I'm gonna pick on Ron for a second, because I know how Ron feels. And I would say, Ron, I'm gonna make this up. So this is not a real school, but I'm gonna say, Ron, we just got done building Lonsdale. We got a payment up from a Department of Schools. They're trying to charge gym equipment, like jump ropes and balls and posters, to this capital account. Are you wanting to pay for those for 20 years? And Ron will say, absolutely not. Send that back to me. I don't want, I'll pay for that out of operating somewhere, right? But ultimately what happens with any department, right, is when they think, oh, I'm getting a new building or I'm getting something new, everything is charged to a certain account, not thinking about how things are paid for. We oftentimes try to review things because my team back here in finance would tell you we don't like to pay things for things that don't have a useful life of 20 years.
Commissioner Schoonmaker?
You want me to ask the $1 million question?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under the debt service analysis for Knox County Schools, where you see 2026 where it goes for $42.5 million and jumps to $50 million in 27, is that in 27 when we start to pay for Hardin Valley Academy?
Well, hold on. Yes and no. Yes, in 2027, that's when we start paying for Hardin Valley, but Ron doesn't pay for Hardin Valley, the county does.
Can
And
you
so that's
explain
not on-
can you explain that?
Yeah.
What does it mean by starting to pay for?
So ultimately, and we'll get into this in the back a little bit more too. So Hardin Valley was in the 2007 bond issue that where combined the county and schools issued $69 million worth of general obligation bonds. In 2007, I shouldn't say he's not paying for any of Hardin Valley. He's paying for a portion of Hardin Valley. Sorry, Ron. It's just but it's not the full amount. So the bonds that were issued in 2007 run through 2034. So they are 28-year bonds. You will hear me say this, and I've said this till I hope you think, why does Chris keep on saying this? Every time I come before you, I talk about 20-year fixed rate debt. How many times have I said that to you all, and you're like, Chris, shut up. I'm tired of hearing about 20-year, just true vanilla fixed rate debt. And the reason I say that is because of things like this. This is a 28-year bond issue, right, that in the year 2024, our current fiscal year, we have not paid 1 penny of principal on any bonds, any items that were issued in that bond issue. So, which we know want to be Hardin Valley Academy. What was just approved, was it last year or current year? Wasn't there an addition to Hardin Valley? So we have issued more debt for Hardin Valley Academy, and we've not paid a penny of principal on the first one. Think about that, right? So what happens then is then we're paying $69 million in principal from 2027 through 2034, okay? on one bond issue. You hear me talk a lot about, we try to get to level debt service, level annual debt service. That can mean a couple of things to us. It means that if we're issuing 20-year bonds, typically we like to pay about 5% in principal every year on those bonds, right? 20 times 5 is 100. That's what we try to do. The state doesn't allow what they call balloon debt anymore. So you couldn't even do that 27 bond issue anymore. But we try to do level debt service payments on principal, and also we try to do what we say is level debt service payments on total debt owed, right? But it kind of gets hard from time to time. So I'm going to go to the sheet that is
Hold on.
yellow and blue make green
Before you
seal.
do, I just have a question.
Yep.
Were there other interest-only bonds issued during this period of time, and for what?
Well, we'll get to that if that's okay. I have some details. I don't think there was interest-only bonds, but there could be ways that bonds were structured to where a lot of the principal was paid towards the back end, okay? So you can structure bonds a number of ways, and we'll get to probably a handful of bonds that were structured differently than what we structure things now. So the next page, which has green and yellow and blue on it, so this could be confusing, so I'm going to make this as simple as possible. The green is the county and school debt service combined. The yellow is county only. The blue is school only. You have on here fiscal years 25 through 2034, okay? What you have in the first column, so you got like 3 columns there, you're going to have the total amount of principal and interest for each section. And then in the middle section, you have the general obligation bonds that were issued in 2003, 2004, 2005, 2007, and 2008. So a total of 5, okay? Total of 5. And then that final column is the amount, is the percentage amount that makes up of the total. See what I'm doing? So a percentage amount of the total of just those 5 bond issues. So I take you, go to the yellow, which is county only. Let's just focus there for a second. Look in 2029, what percentage of principal is, let me go through 2027 through 2029, the amount of principal only paid on those 5 bond issues. Well, it's a big number, right? So 45% of our principal payments made in those years account for 5 bond issues, right? How many bond issues do you typically have in a 20-year cycle? You'd have 20, and if you're going to issue bonds every year, right? So when 5 account for 45%, that's a big hurdle to get over, and it's just challenging. So, and you can see then the school number on those same issues aren't quite as high. They're in the 20s, right? So 25 to 27. And then you look at above and the green combined, they're in the mid 30s. Why is the county one so high? A couple of reasons. One, we did agree at the time to pay for a bigger proportion of Hardin Valley Academy, so that bond is in that number. 2, there were bonds issued for UOP back in 2008-ish, I think. So that's in here as well. So that could be included there. 3, not that we wanted to, but we reduced our capital plan this year because we knew this was coming. So in a little while, I'll get to the point of how do we get through this? What are our options and things like that? And so we chose to do a couple of things. We chose to reduce our capital plan this year, and that's why that would make our percentage higher. Questions on this page before I get to the detail?
I have a question. So according to this schedule and the two previous, from 2024 to 2029, 5 fiscal years, Knox County's combined debt is going to grow from $70 million to $101 million, an
Correct.
increase of 44% in 5 fiscal years. Up until now, your office and this administration has touted that our debt service was always right around 10% of our annual budget. So given that it's going to increase 44% over the next 5 years, do you expect our annual budget to also grow 44% from about 1.1 billion where we're at to almost 1.6 billion to cover it at the same time that you outlined that our reserves for debt service are going to be depleted?
Yeah, I wouldn't anticipate operating budget to grow at that percentage unless Ron gets a windfall from TISA, which I don't.
You would?
I would not.
You would not?
I would not. And so, we keep track. I have on my computer, we'll look at debt per capita and keep eyes on debt per capita, and we'll look at debt as a percentage of the budget. I can share those with you. There's no doubt from 25 through 29 that number is going to increase. Debt service is going to become, it's already treated by us from an accounting standpoint as a major fund, but from an amount that stands out, right? When you hit the 100 million, it's going to, it stands out, right? I would say this.
There's a second part of my question, but.
Yeah, so I would say, keep in mind too, we also estimate our variable rate debt between 4% and 5%. So these numbers may fluctuate some. I don't think they're going to fluctuate a lot, but just know that if you come to me in 2 years and say, Chris, you said that number was going to be 95 and it's only 93. Why were you lying to me? Not lying to you. Just wanted you all to know that there is some variable rate in here. And so that can fluctuate those numbers. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So the second part really ties to the first part. So if our debt service is going to grow from over 44% in the next 5 years, but our budget, our revenue is not going to grow on that same rate, and our fund balance is going to be depleted by late 2027 or 28, a whole year before that number I just outlined. Is it fair to say that Knox County currently is, the only plan currently is to continue to use bonded debt to stay solvent?
No, I don't think we would use debt to stay solvent. I think we can do a few things. I think, and we did some of this in our capital plan that was proposed, and we'll probably do some more. You would see in our capital plan that even in this 5-year plan that we said as Knox County, we were going to pay $10 million to fund some of these projects, not through debt. I think school's number was about 21.9. So I think what you could see is not bonding as much, right? So by not bonding as much and paying for some things with cash, that we can reduce these amounts. And then, but so the debt that makes up the middle piece, those 5 bond issues. So there's not a lot you can do with those except pay, right? I mean, you can't refund it. You don't want to refund that debt. You don't want to refund a bond issue you've not paid a penny of principal on. The other ones, it's probably, if it came to a point where we could refund it at a lower rate and pay it off for the same amount of time and save some money, yeah, we would do that. So I think that we watch for things like that. But ultimately, there is no doubt that, and that's what we want to talk about this, that in the next 4 to 5 years, that there is this increased amount of debt service coming that we have to decide how we're going to tackle.
Does it concern you that our credit rating may take an impact and cost us more even when in 4 years, based upon a 1999 funding model, we're out of debt service reserve funds and we're not taking in the revenue necessary to pay for what is really a ballooning debt in a short amount of time? And you've told us time and again, if our credit rating changes, this financial picture gets worse.
Well, there's no doubt. If you drop your bond rating, then your interest rate goes up. So we do know that we've got a kind of a roadmap on how to keep this from happening. Like, we know that Moody's and S&P want to keep our general fund balance at about 25% of either higher of revenues or expenses. We've got a healthy cushion there, so I think that's okay. I will say this too, not to be all doom and gloom. There is a point that we reach going, and that's a little way away. So, but from 2034 to 2035, the county's debt service amount would drop by about $10 million. So you get to a point and there's room there, right? But how do the key is getting to that point. And so I think that's the challenge that we face, that we're trying to determine how is best to do that. Yes, we'll be using some reserves in debt service fund for sure, but how can you maybe structure some things in a certain way to get there that helps you sustain? I'm sorry.
Commissioner Ward?
To kind of piggyback on what Commissioner Jay is talking about, how much would we need to reduce our spending budget to not go to zero to stop the bleeding? Like, what is that? How much shit are we in basically to stop the bleeding that we have right now by 2028 or 29 when it's going to all run out?
On the debt reserve fund? Is that what you're?
The reserve fund.
Yeah, I think it's fair. So for us, it's this, right? So, and I only got through 2029, right? So there's still 30, 31, 32, 33, 34. There's still 5 years after this 5 years. I just think it's one thing to be aware, right? So what we don't want to do is be blinded that this is coming, right? So I think it was important to get out there and say, by the way, we've talked about this before, about we have some balloon debt that's coming, and so how do we handle this? I think what we then have to do as an administration and as the legislative body decide how we're going to handle these things over the next 5, 6, 7 years. There can be some cases where we can do some refundings if interest rate drops, next year, and have some savings. Now, it won't account for all of that for sure, right? And I'll say this too. There's probably, I didn't go back to these 5 bond issues. I'm sure there were some projects that were built that people utilize every day, and they're great. I'm not knocking what was done then. I just know from a funding standpoint, when we look to pay for these things, we've got a challenge that's coming, and we just need to be aware of it.
Does this include the libraries as well?
This would be everything. So
Okay.
ultimately, everything that has went through our capital plan from 03 on, correct.
So then, this shows up to 29. Are we looking at, is it plateau to a degree, or is it getting worse as we get to 30 and 31 and 32?
No, I think it'll plateau.
It'll
I do.
plateau.
I
All
do,
right.
yeah. But the problem, yeah, the expense will plateau, but getting the revenue, up there to help decrease what that variance is helpful. I mean, you just got to figure out ways to handle that,
The variances together is $16 million, right? So we go from like 5 million to 16, so we have 10 million that we need to find in the next 2 years.
Yeah, and I would say this, and I don't want to speak for Ron. He can speak for himself. But I'm going to imagine what the schools would do is they're going to cover theirs as a transfer from general purpose school fund. So that would be the equivalent of us covering it from it would be the equivalent of covering ours from general fund, right? I think what I would like to do, and you've heard me say this, is ultimately try to cover certain things with cash, with it maybe using some fund balance, refund where it makes sense, and just.
When you say that, though, you're saying don't take on as much debt going forward. That still doesn't mitigate the debt that we already have, correct? So I mean,
Correct.
I get,
Yeah.
pay things with cash so we don't have, like, the commission that's going to sit here 20 years from now are really going to thank us for doing that because that puts less debt on the table for 20 years from now, but not 2 years from now.
I think that's the challenge, right? I think,
is, yeah.
Without a question.
Yeah, somebody 20 years ago screwed you, and so now you got to give us the bad news because it's 20 years later. But fortunately, we won't do that to the next group in 20 years. So
Yeah,
I get that. It still doesn't mitigate the idea that we got a $10 million jump coming in 2 years from now.
I think what you said is spot on. So that's what I said, sit down with the mayor, and I said, here's what's coming. And he said, let's deal with it. I don't want to put this off on anybody else. So we'll talk to commission. Let's put it out there. We don't have to have a solution today. It's not like we're going to go over the cliff today. We just got to know what's coming, right? And so what you have also is the next page after the.
Before you skip to the next page, I just have a follow-up question. You mentioned that there's several things that these balloon payment structured debt, however you want to classify them, paid for that people use every day. And these bonds were issued in 2003, 2004, 2005, 2007, and 2008. Can you outline just a few of the things that were paid for with this balloon debt?
I will send those to you.
Besides schools?
I do know Hardin Valley Academy, as we talked about. I think Powell Middle School addition was in there. We'll go back and outline, what we may do is just send you all those capital plans so you can see them. I'm sure we have them somewhere in a vault if they're not online.
I think it's important for this committee as well as for the public to understand what was spent in 2003, 4, 5, 7, and 8 with this balloon payment debt and what was bought on a capital plan that we may have today, but nobody ever talked about the financial impact of what that's going to happen.
And I would imagine, and we'll get to this, I would imagine that we'll see some libraries and senior centers, but let's just make sure and we'll send those to you.
Okay. And then I have another question for you, following up from Commissioner Ward. Our capital budget, which I'm not going to speak for everybody, but I think even at $20 million last year was incredibly underfunded. In a growing county is dropped in this year's budget proposal to $14 million. Operating costs, unless there are really, really dramatic cuts, don't usually happen in annual budgets. Cost of people go up, cost of healthcare goes up, cost of utilities, et cetera. One of the only real places to cut on a countywide budget is capital costs. So following up on Commissioner Ward, if we have a $10 million shortfall coming, are we expected as a commission to see our capital budget continue to drop each year, 5, 10, or more $1 million during a time where we're, experiencing unprecedented growth? I mean, is that the preview of what's to come to pay for debt from 40 years ago or 20 years ago?
20 years ago? I don't think so.
Because revenues are not going to make it. You've said it yourself.
So I think ultimately, what will be helpful is in the coming months, I can sit down with Ron and we'll sit down with our teams and come up with some sort of strategy that we think makes sense. And so I think it's just important to put this out there to know what's coming. And then let's see how we can sit down and strategize to see what makes the most sense. I think, I would say this, ultimately, we can always say, okay, we're going to say X amount of designations to start every year goes to pay down debt. So listen, I know that hurts because we all get used to having these big balances to end the year, and then we all, say, okay, well, let's fund things that we couldn't fund in the budget for those things. True. But I think we know, and I think everybody agrees, you got to pay debt one, right? And so I would rather do that and keep our capital budget the same or growing than not. I think that charity starts at home, so to speak, and let's get ourselves to where we need to be. And so let us bring you back some maybe options. I think Ron may want to play the lottery. We'll see if that helps. I just have, before you move to the last page, just have one last question. Our third largest line item in our current budget, as well as the last fiscal year budgets, is debt. Education's first, public safety second, debt is almost always number 3. Do you expect that it's going to remain at number 3, or is it going to be our second largest line item in a few years? No, it'll continue to be 3. You're going to have, there are some pension cost increases coming up on UOP. That number went up 1.5 million this year. So it went from 10.4 to 11.9, I think was the number. Is that right? 11, I think it's 11.9. And so it's on its way to like 16.5, right? So there's some more jumps coming there. And so, I think we just got to watch that. I don't ever foresee debt jumping. Public safety is number 2. Any other questions? I think you have 2 more pages, and I just want to be conscious of our 3:30 hard stop. And I'm only going to focus on one because they're all 3 the same. What you have is you have 3 pages. One is combined county and schools. One is just Knox County. One is just schools. So the bottom 2 flow into the top one, right? So all I printed out was basically the 03, the 04, the 2005, the 2007, and the 2008 bond obligations. And so the one that we talked about before was the 2007 is $69 million bond issue. You can see up there that we pay all of the principal from 2027 through 2034. 100% of the principal is paid in those 8 years, I think. 4, 5, 6, 7, yeah. And so go one before, you will see that 2005 bond issue was 77 million. Look at the total on that line, it's like 48.9 million. So that just shows you how much more you have left to pay in principal, right? And you can just see those. The 03 and 04 and 08 aren't I don't want, aren't nearly as bad. They're not, in the 03, here's the problem with some of those.
Were all of these structured the same way with the balloon structure?
All kind of different, right? So really the one, what would be classified as balloon, that would probably meet that term 100% is 2007, because you don't see any principal payments to a certain point. So I think that's technically the only balloon.
But during this period of time, $328 million between 2003, 4, 5, 7, and 8, $328 million are issued under a similar structure.
I think yeah, so ultimately two. And so here's something else that I've looked at. These 5 bond issues from 24 through 34, I think, in principal and interest, we pay about $165 million on these 5 bond issues going back to the start of 24 through 2034. And so I would say this. So technically the only one that would classify it as a balloon bond would be the 2007. The others, they were making some principal payments. They could be small, but you're allowed to structure debt in certain ways. The state approves all debt issuances now for the most part, and so we have to send those, and we work with the state on those. And we have, for the last, even before my tenure, have started to get to what we call level debt service payments as much as possible. And so, and when I say as much as possible, you're going to see some where we may pay 3% in one year and 7% another, but ultimately trying to get to something that's level and level amounts as well. And so, listen, I know debt isn't a exciting topic. I think the only person who was excited today was Jesse. He flew back just for me. So if you have any questions, as you always know, I'm around. You can find me. Listen, we will find a solution, and we'll get through it. I've said to Commissioner Frazier 2 things. She said, "What caused this?" And I said 2 things. Right? I said 2 things. One is we had some old debt that was structured in a way that hamstrings us now. But also, you can also kind of blame us in the sense that we said we're going to structure our debt in a way that we think is what you should do, which is level debt service payments. So you're not just prolonging the agony. You want to be able to pay, if you're going to have a 20-year asset, you want to pay for it evenly over 20 years, not zero for a period of time and then have it all at the end. Because it's not fair to what's happening now, and it's not fair to put that off on somebody else either. And so I think as you look at our debt structures, you'll see that we pretty much do leveled debt service now.
Am I accurate in saying, if I look at this page 5, this is the combined county and schools budget of these bond obligations in 3, 4, 5, 7, and 8. Total was $328 million, but we still owe $254 million if I add up all the columns on the bottom. 20 years later.
Where you at? I'm sorry.
If I add up all the columns at the bottom, this is all of what we still owe, correct?
Yes, if you're on page.
The combined, it's page 5 of.
Yeah.
So everything at the bottom is still, we have to pay.
That is to be correct, yes.
So 20 years later, it was $328 million of bonds issued 20 years ago, and we still owe to this day $254 million.
Yeah. I'm not done.
I just want to make sure. Well, I know we have 14 other years, but I'm just looking at these issues, this one series of bonds, which is essentially putting us in the hardship that we're facing. Thank you. Mr. Schoonmaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, and just for the record, for people who might be watching this at home, Mr. Caldwell, you were just an employee of the finance team, but you were not running the show back in 2003 through 2008, correct?
My tenure started as finance director in 2013, and
Okay.
I was an employee in '02.
Okay.
I started as a staff accountant in
Yes,
2002.
But you were not making these decisions for the
No.
county. That
If
was
we
somebody
want-
else.
If we want to look and criticize any debt issue from 2013 to current, we can do
Correct.
that as well.
That's the
Yeah.
point I wanted to make,
Yeah.
that you've been in charge since 2013, and we do appreciate it.
Are there any additional questions for Mr. Caldwell on this or anything else presented to the Finance Committee? And Mr. Caldwell, I think you're going to follow up with a report of what we spent $328 million on in this series of
Yeah,
debt.
we'll find those capital plans and share them for sure, 100%.
Thank you, sir. Is there any new business to come before the Finance Committee? Are there any topics or agenda items that anyone would like to add to the next Finance Committee meeting agenda? If there are, feel free to send those to me, and we will put them on the next agenda. Seeing no further business or objection, Finance Committee is adjourned.